Deep Dive Film School makes no claim of ownership of the film footage used in this episode. The film footage is owned entirely by the copyright holders. Also, we're going to spoil the hell out of this movie, so this is your warning. Welcome to Deep Dive Film School!
This week we're going to continue our Nick Cage Festival with the one and only Raising Arizona from the Coen Brothers.
Let's dive on in.
Oh yeah. Yeehaw!
All right, everybody, I am Adam Sherlock.
And I'm Adam Poulter.
And if you like what you see /hear, please like and subscribe. You can find us in all the spaces and places that people what?
Find good media, Sherlock.
That's right. We have festivals, we have 101s, we do punishment reviews.
All the things that are fun to us, I think.
Yeah.
Hopefully fun to you guys, and we segment things out to be fun and do random shit and be able to talk about Nick Cage and also in the same week be able to talk about Tommy Boy.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, who knows?
So, lots of fun and wide breadth.
Yes.
So please like and subscribe. All right. Have we ever reviewed this movie on
anything we've done?
I don't. This for 15 plus years.
Yeah, I don't think we have.
I was trying to rack my brain. I was like, I don't know. I'm sure we've talked about it.
Yeah.
I don't know if we've done a full-on review, though.
I don't think that we have. This is pretty early in Cage's career. Obviously, you had stuff like you had Peggy Sue before this and Valley Girls before this. So there's stuff that existed before, but this is probably him coming into his prime as the main character,
like the lead guy.
Yeah, that the movie really hinges on, and it represents, I feel like, a style of him that we saw a little bit of in the 80s and into the 90s, but then disappeared. Like,
I agree.
He is, in this movie, he is almost Bugs Bunny.
That's actually perfect.
Or no, sorry, not Bugs Bunny. He's
the Roadrunner.
He's Wile E. Coyote. Yeah. That's what it is. Yeah. He's Wile E. Coyote. I mean, he's basically just a cartoon that almost dies multiple times.
And it's weird. Like, it is a weird role. And I wrote that down. I was going to ask you, like, he's pretty young here. And not only is this is Coen Brothers' second movie, too. Like, they had a great critical hit with Blood Simple, but this was, I think, their first kind of, like, blockbuster kind of hit in the theaters that really got them known a little more. And then also Nick Cage as well breaking out. And I was going to ask, like, how much does his age factor into what he's doing here? Whether it's inexperience and not knowing who he was, he's obviously, like, he's not as extreme maybe as some of his other movies, especially later in his career. But it's also still just a weird character.
I mean, part of it's, I feel like, because the Coens, even from this early on, know what they want
completely
things to be.
I was never doubting their abilities as filmmakers.
Yeah,
it's not that saying that but it's their second movie. There's still a lot of shit they don't know. But this is completely different than Blood Simple.
Well, and even down to, I mean, if you think about, and I didn't even think about this until watching it this time, is that the movie is narrated by Cage, right? And it is this, the narration is this, like, I don't even.
It's like weirdly poetic sometimes.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say, is that it stretches over into, like, narrative poetry levels of verboseness that is, like, first of all, just hilarious because he is this, like, multiple felon redneck ding dong, right?
Yeah.
But the thing that's interesting to me, and the thing that made me realize how deliberate all these choices were in probably what the Coens telegraphed to Cage of what his performance should be like, is he's never like that when he's talking. Yeah. It's just his voiceover that's so well spoken.
And a lot of times that's him trying to explain dreams, so there's more breadth of what you can talk about and get weird about, because really it's not like a constant thing. It's really when we get those, when we...
But it's just, I'm barren. Yeah. How could it be that this woman who's... Right? Yeah. And he goes on this, like, diatribe.
For sure.
That's so, like, something from, like, a like early 1900s novel. But then you go, that is so deliberate, because then when we get him interacting, he's like, God damn, are you kidding me? Garcelle's a family here, right? Which you're like, okay, that's more of what that character would be
monologue,
like.
Yeah.
But it's this duality between those two things that you go, yeah, it is interesting because he came up with different ways to be weird later in his career.
Yeah.
But this was something really particular that is, and it fits in with the world that this movie lives in.
Completely.
Because all the characters are caricatures. There is no real human being in this movie. Everyone is broad strokes of ridiculousness.
Oh yeah, completely. You know, like and the Coens are so good at that, right?
Oh yeah,
the writing here is amazing. I'm actually surprised Nick Cage hasn't made a career of just working with them. He seems perfect. For them and their style and what he could do and how weird he can get. Like, isn't that a little surprising? Because there's a lot of people that will try and go back and work with the Coens because of how prolific they are as directors, and
that is really interesting.
Like a perfect match for a lot of their stuff that they went on to do.
That is interesting. I hadn't thought about that.
He hasn't really been in one since Raising Arizona, and that was 1987.
Yeah,
so that's a long time ago. So it's kind of interesting, but man, what a fucking brilliant movie.
Yeah,
like just from a comedy aspect, you can tell that people like Edgar Wright totally rip off the Coens to a degree, especially with the pacing of this movie, and the cinematography and this like POV like physical comedy that we're watching throughout, and just the angles of like making someone seem more damning than they are, and the kids, and just the whole ridiculous situation. I fucking love Holly Hunter. I wish she was in more stuff.
Know.
Like she's always good.
So good.
What happened to her?
I don't know. I don't know, but you're right. She's so good here.
I've always loved her. I can't think of something she's bad in.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. She's fantastic. Let's talk for a minute about these POV shots, and
huge part of the movie.
Well, and something that I think a lot of people forget, or they never knew, which is that early on in both of their careers, the Coens got their start with Sam Raimi.
Oh, well,
and that
makes a ton of sense.
And that the Coens did second camera work on Evil Dead.
Well, shit.
And that the Raimi's version of the Steadicam, which he referred to as the shaky cam, is the film camera bolted down onto a 2x6 that two people hold onto and fucking run with.
Yeah.
Right. And that's how you get that crazy Evil Dead monster.
Yeah.
And it's used all over the place in this movie.
Like, I remember them teaching the robbery of the Huggies, where it's the first time he does it after they've taken the kid and she's in the car like, that son of bitch. And all of a sudden the camera goes woof. But like as he comes out, the camera comes in and they're like pulling off the bumper of the car, and then you follow this, and then the end of that scene where they go up and up the ladder and everything, and the mom realizes.
Yeah, it comes right into the middle of her face screaming.
Separate scenes, but like it's just the wild, fast-paced cutting, mostly for comedic effect here, and framing, and just like they do so many sneaky things to make you, just think about a character in a certain way.
Yep.
Like even the way Gale, gets birthed out of the mud, like shit like so that. Amazing. It says so much about him and his character and how they are
screaming. Grabs William Forsythe's leg and drags him out. But but I think that the Sam Raimi thing is really interesting and worth noting because you go,
how did I not know that?
Yeah. So Sam Raimi actually, I believe, they co-wrote a movie together that didn't do very well. That was their very first movie together called Crime Wave. So like they had known each other for years, just film school and stuff like that. The shaky cam was this thing that Sam Raimi built,
learned from him.
And that they all used together in these different movies.
Love it.
So like you can see that in this movie in particular. I mean, there's other movies where they've used it before, but I think Raising Arizona, it's all over the place in this movie.
Like I was saying earlier, this was a scene they showed in film school for the camera work. But You're right. I forgot how much is the POV kind of like craziness, and it's super fun. Like, it keeps it going. and it just creates this own weird tone that you have to get a lot of footage for, because it is so fast paced. But man, that mixed with the writing here and just the silly, this is probably maybe the closest to Fargo as far as like the silly accents and the characters and stuff like that, where that's just a part of where they live. And I think it's just like Arizona is where they live, right? Or something like
somewhere in the deserts of Arizona.
Arizona, yeah, these rednecks live in trailers in the middle of nowhere with no shade.
Yeah. That was beautiful. The sunsets and all that. God.
I mean, the character here, we can talk about Gale and Yvel. Probably, and this is saying a lot, some of the funniest parts of the movie include them.
Oh, yeah.
And some of the lines like that they have, like, boy, man, we sure didn't mean to influence anybody.
Yeah.
Just all of these, like...
We released ourselves upon our own recognizance.
Yeah, shit like that. Like, you're a young, healthy boy. What do you need a job for? So many amazing
and they're
lines.
So young, too. William Forsythe looks like he's so tiny.
He's always good. Speaking of always good, I know we say this a lot, but John Goodman.
Oh, man.
Wow.
Always amazing.
And the amount of pomade he's putting in his hair.
Oh, yeah.
That first scene after jail.
Can we talk about that scene for a minute? Because I've never found an explanation that makes any sense to me. But when they go into that restroom and they are putting all the pomade in, just big old goops of it, right? Spray painted on the wall of the men's room behind them is a reference to Dr. Strangelove. And it says OPEPOE. And it's peace on earth, purity of essence.
Oh.
It's the code word to send the planes back that the general puts in.
Excellent.
In Dr. Strangelove.
It's some sort of recurrent theme he kept repeating. It's a variation on peace on earth or purity of essence. EOP, OP, it's one of those.
Put your hands up on top of your head.
But I'm like, why is that there? And I've wondered that since I was a kid. And I first saw this movie because I was like, I spotted it. And I told my dad, I was like, there's a reference to Dr. Strangelove in Raising Arizona. Wow. And I've never found, so if anybody knows, if there's some bit of trivia out there,
comment below.
Please do. But like, I've never found an adequate answer for it. And it's always made me spellbound where I'm just like, why is that in there?
I feel like I've heard that at some point, but I don't think I don't think I remembered that. It's been a while since I've seen this movie.
I've always remembered that for some reason. But
random.
And then later Leonard Smalls comes in and smells the pomade, so he's on the trail of our two fugitives, which is like
and obviously like things, they want to steal this baby because let's talk about Nathan Arizona here for a little bit, because the Arizona Quints or whatever they're called, but him constantly promoting Unpainted Arizona and all of this
Unpainted Huff and Hines.
Would you shop at Unpainted Huff and Hines?
He is, I don't know who that actor is. Who is that?
The only thing, and you're going to laugh when I tell you this, and this is my weird photographic memory that I've seen him in. He's Beetroot from Twins. He's the guy who's buying the weird engine thing that Danny DeVito is stealing.
Of course know that.
That's the only thing I can think of what he's in. But he's awesome, and
he's amazing.
Another great Coen Brothers.
Oh, character. Yoda's and shit. Like every one of his lines is a keeper.
Oh,
like,
and he's a hard ass.
He's not
gonna take shit from nobody.
Yeah,
he's yelling at the cops, telling him what to do.
Yeah. It's amazing. Well, and I love that all of his sequences, he is framed dead center, and all these people are talking around him, and he's just turning and yelling at all of them. However, there's like 3 different times that it's that kind of a shot of him just sitting there, and the camera is set on the table staring at him.
And he ends up having a real kind of heart of gold in this movie too.
Yeah.
And it's kind of surprising with the way that they built him up, and that's just maybe his wild personality, I guess, of the guy. But like, even in the papers where they talk about the Quints being born, it says more than we can handle, and then they say that multiple times in the movie. They seem like they got more than they can handle.
It's their justification.
I think I got the best one.
It's so funny that somehow, and I was thinking about that watching it this time too, is that like, yeah, it, you know, the soundtrack and the acting and the kinetic direction and all these different things help this. But there's a real possibility that you're playing with fire when you're like, it's a movie about a kidnapping. Like
Sure.
it can land really wrong, right? And the baby is put in danger technically, right?
Yeah.
Like they leave it on top of the car. They leave it behind multiple
Definitely.
times. And yet somehow, and maybe it's because the characters
Yeah,
are
how
all
do they get away with
caricatures.
that?
I don't know, but I was thinking about that where I was like, this is actually more of a feat than you would think.
Well, you know, we had a similar discussion when we talked about Jojo Rabbit and how, like, hey, you're talking about the Holocaust here.
Yeah.
Like, but it's also a hilarious movie.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's way more extreme than a kidnapping. But like that balance of comedy and touchiness of where it could go is definitely a hard balance to achieve because we never really feel like we're rooting for High and Ed.
Yeah.
For most of this movie.
I know, even though they're the kidnappers,
Yeah.
like they've done the really bad
But
thing.
their places are their hearts are in a good place.
Right.
And so you're like, yeah, maybe they do have more than they can handle or whatever.
Yeah, I don't
sure.
know. I don't know how it works. And maybe it's the snarkiness of it, or that somehow we know that the kid's never actually in danger. I also love that even our two, you know, they're technically Gale and what's Forsyth's name?
Oh, it's Elvin.
Elvin. Technically they're antagonists. They're not protagonists. They
No doubt. It's like, who wears the pants in this family, huh?
yeah, they make things worse.
Yes.
But at the same time, even though we watch them rob banks and steal the baby from the kidnappers, they also have hearts of gold. Like they fall in love. We ain't giving him back. Oh, we ain't giving him back. Because we love the baby too, right? Like he's Gale Jr. now. Like all of that
He has
stuff
multiple
again.
names throughout the movie.
Again, is like everyone's falling in love with this baby, right? And that is maybe
cute,
part of how they get away with it, right? Is the baby is very cute. Even he's trying to cover his head with the hoodie when they're in the car chase. Like all that's amazing.
Yeah.
But there is like somehow you're like, we're watching these guys be armed robbers, but we also somehow know that they also are not going to shoot and kill anybody, right?
Ultimately. Yeah, and I think it's because of how the Coens set the tone, right? If they didn't set it a certain way to make you feel like this was believable or this, you know, this wacky world that they're so good at creating, but I mean, you throw in something like The Lone Biker, The Apocalypse, right? And then that, like, you're like, okay, so it's not necessarily magic in this world, but like, there's heightened characters here, and you know this is you have to suspend your disbelief for comedic effect here, and there's so many things to do that for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not gritty realism. I think part of why that works is because the narration is dreamlike, and also movies don't often do this, and I think when they do this, it's very deliberate. And obviously, when the Coens do things in their movies, it's always deliberate. But the opening 11 minutes of this movie before we get our title sequence, the song it reminds me, or retroactively, this movie reminds me of this. Royal Tenenbaums did this also with the instrumental version of Hey Jude.
Yeah.
And it's that this song builds up through that,
and banjo
but it's
thing.
before the yodeling or any of that. It comes in. It's like it's this slow build of the exact same song that lasts through those first 11 minutes before we get to the Raising Arizona title card, right? But that sets up the mythos of this isn't a real world, right?
Great title card too.
And it's a great title card. But I do think that where there's multiple montages of things happening with one song building up through huge expanses of it, take us out of reality, purposely take us out of reality.
Sure. It's the sneaky stuff that the Coens are doing to manipulate you that you don't think about. Yeah, like you're like, oh, I've heard this song before, and it's like, oh yeah, it was at the beginning of the movie, and,
right?
And then they keep injecting it to heighten realities throughout. You know, I mean, that yodeling gets pretty out of control.
Well, and I think even when you're talking about that days might be passing or long stretches of time might be passing, and that music is still stitching everything together.
Sure.
Again, it's a certain kind of a montage. I'm thinking of when it's used to show a different kind of unreality. Naked Lunch has done that. Dark City has done that, just to show us that, like, we're not in reality, right? Like, we're not totally changing our attitude and shifting to a new time period. We're still within this fable. And that's really what this movie is, right?
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, weirdly, like something like Tron comes to mind too. That's
Totally.
a similar thing.
Yeah, we're like, this is a non-reality, and so like the music is stitching the parts together rather than music cues saying, "Hey, we're
Telling
in something
us how
new."
to feel.
Yeah.
Interesting. Wow. Let's talk about the Lone Biker of the Apocalypse.
Leonard Smalls.
Leonard Smalls.
It's such a good name. It's such a good name. When he says it, you're like, sure.
I kind of always wanted, it is a great name, but I always kind of wanted him to just be nameless. And just be called the Lone Biker of the Apocalypse.
But I love it when Huffenheinz is like, "You with Smalls? Big guy dressed like a rock star?" Amazing character.
Yeah.
What a weird, like, it's like he walked right off the set of Mad Max.
Oh, completely.
Yeah.
And just got in the wrong movie and has this nose and, he's basically a headhunter, right? And they don't really tell us that other than through his dreams of this guy. And all of these legends about him. And he is a pretty badass. Like even near the end when Nick Cage is getting his ass beat by him, like, he like, no one is touching him. Like,
no, not at all.
You could barely lay a finger on him.
And he's like, and he's twirling the shotguns around, and when he shoots things, they explode, right? Like
lizards and
and rabbits, and but also, like, I like that he also is verbose. Like, when he's talking, he also has that same
old
great
wise man.
kind of language in his dialogue. And obviously there is a duality. I mean, there's a couple of really interesting dualities that are taking place here.
Yeah.
I think one, we hit the nose on the head a little bit, where right before their fight sequence ends, and High pulls away part of his jacket, they share a tattoo.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think that really, if you look at it this way, that
it's like a rooster or
I think it's the Roadrunner, but
Roadrunner,
with like a cigar in its mouth, right?
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about, and I'm skipping around a little bit, but Sam McMurray's character, with Frances McDormand, Glenn,
oh my god,
keep your goddamn hands off my wife, Glenn.
Him just telling the light bulb joke,
dude, and getting it wrong over and over again,
jokes and all that stuff. He's even like bad at being racist.
Yeah, he's just like, and then he's like asking if, like, he's saying, like, we could swing, like, that's how you can get some enjoyment, because I think that, and I'm skipping around a little bit, but bear with me here.
Yeah.
That sequence, which is just so damn funny in its own right, it also gives High a total panic attack of, like, I don't want this.
I mean, the
like,
kids
I don't,
are constantly banging, hitting, jumping.
They're awful.
Scratching, flying, like all this stuff. And Frances McDormand, oh my god,
that fucking hair, and yeah, and she's like, what happens if you get hit by a car? Like, what happens, honey?
The dip tat?
Do you get the dip tat? Mine is Fontanelle. So, but
you gotta get the dip tat.
I think that it when he is seeing what Glenn's life is like, it terrifies him, because he's like, that's one version of his future.
Yeah.
Right.
And Gale and Yvel are the other.
Well, and then the dark shadow version of his future is Leonard Smalls, right? The biker of the apocalypse is like, that's what a real outlaw looks like. Like, he's been this fake outlaw who never loaded his gun, keeps going back and getting into the system and having to deal with all of that. But he's lovable. He's like, I'm not really a bad guy. Leonard Smalls is a fucking bad guy.
Yes.
But obviously they share some tether because of the tattoo. And so I'm like, he's seeing, it's almost like there's some level of Christmas Carol kind of a thing of like, these are the ghosts of who Hyde could actually be, right? Are like these different versions, and each one freaks him out. Each one he hates, right? Even though he loves Gale, and I keep wanting to say, was it Evel or Ed?
Evel, yeah.
Evel. Even though he loves those guys, he's also like, I also don't want to be that.
Yeah.
Like, I want my own little thing here, but I don't know if I want to be a family man either. Like, that's fucked up too.
I love bad criminals in movies.
I know.
It's just like a recipe for success with a comedy like this.
Yeah, the whole code names conversation and all that.
We're using code names.
Yeah. It's like, well, which one you wanting us to do, young fella? So all that stuff is so good.
Again, they have some of the best lines.
Oh, definitely.
But no, I think you're totally right with the parallel. Like, he's trying to figure out what he wants to be, and he swings both ways, right?
Yeah.
He's trying to satisfy multiple versions of himself, and so it's kind of that's the duality you're talking about.
Yeah.
Right? And the Lone Biker the Apocalypse is that cigarette in the face of like, hey, wake up.
Yeah. This is like, you guys aren't really kidnappers. Mm-hmm. This dude's a kidnapper. Like whatever you thought you were doing, this is the guy that actually does this kind of shit. He's a bounty hunter. Yep. And he lets us know really early on in his first real conversation with Nathan Arizona, I'll find the kid. It's up to you whether or not you want him back. Because if you don't want him back, I'll sell him to the highest bidder. And so you're like, oh wow, like you're
not messing around.
Yeah, you don't give a shit. You don't. And he has the little baby shoes.
Yeah,
like that whole thing. Like all of that's so good. It's such an interesting mix of genres, as we know that the Coens go on to do over and over and over again.
Yeah.
But again, the fucking swagger in movie 2.
Seriously, of having that much control of your atmosphere.
Because I love Blood Simple. Don't get me wrong, and it has heart-stopping, amazing moments. Comedy's harder, and before there was the saying, "Oh, it's Coen-esque," there was nothing else.
Yes.
If you mixed genres together, you did it in a way that was still maybe entertaining, but not everybody got. You were Jim Jarmusch.
Sure.
You were doing stuff that was like,
yeah,
you kind of had to know about all the French movies that Jarmusch was watching and then be like, and it's a stick-up movie, right? Like, then you could kind of get it, but...
That's what makes them so special.
Yeah, it somehow still has this universal appeal, even if most people don't get all the jokes, right? They get enough of them to be like, I loved it. By the end, I understood it, and it was spellbinding, and I had fun.
You know, there's a lot of Coen Brothers movies that I love, and a lot of them are weird and heady and like,
too much.
Like just
sometimes too much.
You can see why people maybe not be super into them. This is an easy start if you don't.
Oh
know
yeah,
Brothers. Like this is you. I mean. You re-release this in the theaters and it would go wild, you know. So
yeah,
it's so fascinating about Sam Raimi cinematography thing because I totally thought that and wrote that down. Of like, there's definitely some remnants of that here, and it's fun to get that confirmed by you. I'm sure I could have just looked it up, but like just watching the movie and just noticing the stylization of how they're shooting.
I have a Coen Brothers book around here somewhere, and when it got to that chapter talking about their early film school days, I was like, that's nuts, and it's totally not. And actually, Raimi references it when he made A Simple Plan.
Yeah.
He was like, I got a hold of those guys right after I watched Fargo and was like, I'm so inspired.
Wow.
And so he made A Simple Plan, which totally feels like a love letter.
Pretty close.
A love letter to Fargo, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's end out here on this final narration where he actually looks forward to Nathan Jr.'s life.
Yeah.
And kind of sees his future of grandkids and you know, just his whole life around him. It's really beautiful. And, you know,
it is.
It's of an old couple and their kids and their grandkids.
It's surprisingly, and maybe this shows their youth, it's surprisingly nostalgic and romantic for the Coens.
Yeah.
They don't love to do that. Like, I think
wrap things up in a bow.
Well,
like that.
or even be romantic.
Mm-hmm.
Like when they're romantic, it's
selfish or like
or nuanced. It's I got on the 2-cent stamp. Well, people still need the 2-cent stamp, right?
That's the relationship I was going to go to.
Yeah, it's that kind. It's not sappy, which this I love, and it is brilliant, but it's also sappy in like the world's best way.
I agree.
And that's very unusual for them. So maybe that shows their lack of how deep they dig into their own brains. Because here it's like, yeah, and maybe it was Utah, which is where we're filming from.
Yeah, how random is it that they did the movie
maybe
like
it was Utah.
Yeah,
it's really good.
Utah in parts.
Yeah, it does.
Amazing Nick Cage performance. Amazing movie in general. We're doing his greatest hits, I think, really here. So please continue to watch, like, and subscribe. Hit us up in all the spaces and places.
One quick note. We did switch up. We're going to be doing Mandy this October for a horror movie festival. Yes. And so we're switching that out, and we'll be doing Adaptation in 2 weeks, which you can't, I mean, it was going to be, it was either going to be like Adaptation or Leaving Las Vegas. Yeah. And I think I don't want to be suicidal, so it's going to be Adaptation.
Plus you get a 2 of Nick Cage, 2 for 1.
Yeah, man, double the pleasure.
So please like and subscribe and follow along, and we'll see you next week.
Bye, you guys.